You're getting ready for a Q&A session. And if you haven't done this before, it can feel kind of scary. You have your presentation all set, you know your speaking points, and then you could be asked some questions that are pretty off the cuff. So even if you know your stuff, there's a chance that you could blank and be like, wait, what do I say? So I'm going to let you know how to approach three common scenarios that can trip new speakers up and even enduring speakers alike if they are not prepared for them. We're going to talk about how to approach hostile questions, silence, and rambling. Okay, first up is hostile questions. This could be a heckler saying something. In those cases, it's more than likely a good idea to ignore it and move onward. If it becomes really persistent, ideally the event organizer should be on that. And if they're not, then maybe you could give a call to action, say, oh, hey, Julie, if that's the event organizer's name, can you please take care of that so we can stay focused? Don't give it a lot of your attention and don't directly engage with it. That's more of the work for a stand-up comic. So I'll give you an example. There was a time when I was in Q&A after networking for introverts, and I received a question, hey, why did you give a talk about introversion when you are so obviously an extrovert? And some people could perceive that as a little hostile because it's directly sort of questioning what you say that you stand for, right? The wrong way to approach this is to get angry or defensive. And it's all in your tone to maintain that sense of calm and power in the situation because, hey, people are asking questions because they want to learn from you. And if someone is perceiving a misalignment, it doesn't mean that you're misaligned. It could mean that they simply are lacking context. So, how I provided context in this situation was I did a power move. I redirected the focus back to them. And I asked, well, so what do you think I was doing before this event? And essentially, a series of those questions that they answered illustrated my level of introversion and all the downtime that I had taken to be able to show up fully. And it became a learning opportunity to make a distinction between confidence and extroversion because they are not the same. And and it became a really great opportunity for the audience to be really clear on that, including the person that asked that question. Another one is silence. Let's say that you are at your Q&A, typically after a presentation, and a big mistake that I've seen, especially new presenters make, is they go through their whole presentation, including how to stay connected, and then they open the floor to Q&A and nobody has questions. And then they immediately lose their authority because they're nervously looking around the room and no one has anything that they have to say. And I mean, you could, if you're in that situation and you're already in that, then you can always say, well, it sounds like we were really thorough. And thank you so much for attending. Looking forward to staying connected. But you don't need to get there. So there are a few ways that you can understand how engaged your audience is. You can seed a couple of times like, oh, we can go into more detail about this in Q&A. Raise your hand if that would be interesting to you. Read the room, see if people are actively raising their hand when you mention Q&A. And what I like to do is have my Q&A take place right before the closing slide. So then you get to ask, all right, we'll go into Q&A if there are any questions in a moment, and then I'll let you know how to stay connected. So you're kind of setting the stage, and then you say, show of hands, does anyone think they might have a question? And then give it a few seconds, scan the room. If it's looking like no one really has a question, then what you could decide to do, you could move on and go into how to stay connected and encourage people, hey, if you didn't feel comfortable sharing your question in front of the audience, here's another way to connect with me and ask. Or you can decide to go into a story, or you can say, one of my frequently asked questions is, and don't skip a beat. Don't let people know this is not a time to make a comment like, oh, I guess nobody has any questions, or, don't get hurt about this, okay? It doesn't always mean that people are disengaged. It could just mean that they're overwhelmed, or maybe it was a lot of information, or they're not comfortable public speaking. So if there is a point that you want to make that isn't already in your presentation or you want to go deeper, go ahead and use this opportunity to take the floor if you're not seeing hands raised. And then after you do that, don't ask again if people have questions because you want to leave on a high note, a power note. So how you do that is you've reclaimed the focus, you told a story, and now you're going into how to stay connected with you. Okay, the third is rambling. How do you deal with an audience member who is asking a question, but it's actually not a question? It's a story. and maybe not even a short story. So this can definitely happen when you have audience members that are not professional public speakers. It happens. So what I'd like to encourage you to do if you find yourself in this situation is don't be afraid to interrupt. And you can wait until there's a slight pause or look at your audience members. If they are disengaging, rolling their eyes, then you know it's gone on way too long. Don't let it go on much longer than that. And you can, at any point in time, you're the speaker, you have the mic. You can say, "Oh, I'm gonna pause you there. Thank you for your question," express gratitude, and say, "What I gathered is," and give them like a one sentence synopsis of what their question was according to your perception. And if you'd like, you can say with a nod, "Is that about right?" So then you get their opt-in. They're like, "Yes." But if they're a rambler, maybe you don't want to ask a question like that because they could ramble again or go into like the slight nuance that doesn't really matter. So it's up to you how you want to navigate that and how much time you even have. If it's a conference, for example, where you only have the room for a set amount of time. And when you do pause them, you can say, "Hey, I'm going to pause you right there to be sure that we have time for more questions." Then let people know, keep an eye on the time. So let's say that you have 3 minutes left. You can say, "Hey, we have 3 minutes left. I have time for one more question before we wrap up." And I'll be available to take questions in the hallway to make way for the next speaker if we have additional questions. And then you can look around the room, and the first person who raises their hand, you're like, "Okay, you'll be our last question for now." They ask the question, and then you go into your closing statements and all of that. And one of the reasons why I recommend sticking around if you can is because having that FaceTime can be so valuable for making these business connections and having potential collaborations take place. And let's say after you could even have a book signing if you have a book, for example, and that can be an extra incentive for people to purchase your book. Or maybe the audience members get a copy because they already have a ticket to the event or whatever it is. And it's an opportunity to continue to build bridges to these people that maybe you've never met before and maybe you wouldn't have met if you were not there. I trust that there was something in here for you for preparation for your Q&A experience. And if you have any lingering questions, if you have had an experience that you wish you handled better or that you did handle pretty well, go ahead and let us know down below. I am rooting you on and wishing you a really great Q&A session.